I'll never forget that Sunday evening, it's like it happened just yesterday. I was sitting alone in the den, relaxing, when my wife, Emily, came through the front door. She didn't even look my way, just tossed her bag and keys onto the entry table, acting like I was invisible. Honestly, her ignoring me wasn't anything new. After years of her coldness, I'd grown used to feeling like nothing more than part of the furniture. Without a word, she strolled down the hall toward our bedroom, and right then, an idea that had been brewing in my mind began to click into place. I walked over to the table, pocketed her keys, then started rifling through her purse. I took her phone, wallet, and cleaned out every dollar and credit card in there. I even took her driver's license, figured that might throw a little wrench in her night. Then I returned to my seat in the den, just in time to see her come out of the bedroom, all dressed up and ready for whatever work meeting she had going on. She grabbed her purse, slung it over her shoulder, and finally noticed me sitting there, but her look was as cold as ever. "Meeting up with some friends from work tonight," she said, her tone icy as always. "Don't wait up." I wasn't playing dumb anymore. I looked her square in the eye and replied, "Funny. I know you're not meeting up with work friends." I stood up, keeping my voice calm. "You're meeting your boyfriend, so let's stop pretending, alright?" She stopped in her tracks, completely taken aback that I'd called her out like that. But she quickly fired back, defiant. "Well, if you know, Matt, then you've got two choices. You can either give me space and let me live my life, or you can go ahead and file for divorce." Her eyes had this fierce, challenging look. "Actually, I'm taking option 3, I said, stepping closer. Before she could react, I reached for her hand and slipped her engagement and wedding rings off her finger, looking her dead in the eye. "You walk out that door tonight, and you lose everything. The house, the car, our daughter. You lose me." I couldn't tell if she believed me, but for a second, her face went pale. Her voice shook a little as she snapped back. "You'll regret this, Matt. My lawyer's going to tear you apart." But her threats meant nothing to me. I'd already made up my mind. I took her by the arm, firm but not rough, and walked her straight to the front door. She protested, but I didn't stop until she was standing out on the porch. Then I closed the door, locked it tight, and didn't look back. She screamed outside, but it didn't matter. I'd changed the locks earlier that day. As I stood there, a strange weight lifted off my shoulders. I'd taken my first real step toward freedom, and I knew there was no turning back now. After locking Emily out, I picked up the phone and called my daughter, Sarah, who was away at college. I kept my voice steady as I told her, "Things have hit the breaking point with your mom. She's been seeing someone else, and I thought you should know." I mentioned that I had recordings of our arguments to show her, so she'd understand everything that had been going on. Sarah agreed to come home that weekend. I felt a little relief, knowing I'd have her support. With that settled, I gave Diane, our neighbor a few houses down, a quick call. We'd always had a friendly connection, and she'd even hinted once or twice that if I ever needed a place to crash, her door was open. "Hey, Diane," I said quietly. "If your offer's still good, I might need a place tonight." She didn't hesitate, promised to swing by later. Thinking back over my marriage with Emily, I couldn't help but wonder how things had gone so wrong. We'd married young, had Sarah soon after, and those early years had a kind of purpose and happiness. But over time, Emily changed. She became demanding, bitter, impossible to please. I'd spent years trying to make her happy, but it was never enough. In return, all she gave me was resentment. Then came the final straw, her affair. And it wasn't even with anyone decent, just some guy named Randy with a sketchy past. By the time I found out, I felt an odd kind of acceptance. Instead of heartbreak, I almost felt relieved. Her betrayal was the push I needed to finally plan my way out. I didn't want a messy fight over money or endless courtroom drama. I just wanted to be done. So I spent months preparing, moving money out of our accounts, taking cash from the house, and changing the locks. And I had another ace up my sleeve. I'd recorded every argument, every insult she threw at me. She never suspected, probably thought my old MP3 player was just for music. Little did she know, it was my little vault of evidence against her. That Monday, I went into work with a lighter heart than I'd felt in years. I even threw a little celebration in the break room, a simple cake and a banner that read, "Happy Divorce." Nothing grand, just a small taste of freedom. Right on cue, the process server came in, a cheerful woman who handed me the divorce papers with a smile. We even took a picture, with me planting a playful kiss on Diane's cheek. As soon as the papers were served, I sent the photos right over to Emily, along with a few extras. One shot showed Diane and me lounging in bed, with her wearing Emily's old wedding rings. I made sure it looked as cozy as could be, just to drive the point home. Within the hour, Emily called, her voice quaking with anger. "You jerk! My lawyer's going to ruin you after he sees those photos." I laughed and said, "Take it easy, Emily. There's nothing improper in those pictures. Just a couple of neighbors enjoying themselves." She tried to argue, but I cut her off. "Oh, and if you're planning to come by and pick anything up, make it before 6:45. Diane and I have plans tonight, and I don't want to be late." I hung up, ignoring the angry messages that poured in afterward. I'd never felt freer. By the end of the week, Emily was fuming more than I'd ever seen. That same day, I parked my car a little ways from her office and waited until she was pulling a late shift. When the coast was clear, I slipped over to her car and clipped the valve stems on all 4 tires, hoping it would keep her tied up for a few hours. Not long after, she showed up at the house, furious and all dressed up. She must have borrowed clothes from her boyfriend. I left quietly through the back and headed to Diane's, leaving Emily pounding on the door and yelling into the night. The next morning, I discovered she'd shattered one of our front windows, leaving blood on the frame where she'd cut herself. She tried to get inside with a tire iron, throwing it against the glass in a fit of rage. I reviewed the footage from the porch camera and saved every second of it. She was shouting threats as she pounded on the window, her voice high-pitched and frantic. It was like seeing a stranger, a version of her I'd never truly known, totally out of control. I called the police, who came quickly to help me file a restraining order. By the next day, Emily had been served with a court order to keep at least 500 feet from me and the house. Later, she called me, furious and demanding answers. "You idiot! What do you think you're doing?" she yelled into the phone. I calmly recorded the conversation, letting her rant so I could catch every word. Sometimes people slip up when they're mad, letting things out they'd normally keep hidden, and I was hoping she'd reveal something useful. She didn't disappoint. Not long after, Emily reached out again, but this time her tone was surprisingly calm. She said her friend Jennifer would be coming by to pick up some of her things. That made me curious. What could be so urgent that she'd send someone else to grab it? On Tuesday afternoon, I set up a hidden camera in our bedroom, feeding the live video to a monitor in my office. When Jennifer arrived, she was polite but a little jittery as she started packing Emily's clothes into black trash bags. After a few minutes, she asked if I'd get her a glass of water, and I agreed. But as soon as I left the room, I checked the monitor and saw her reaching into the closet, pulling out a small shoebox, and slipping it into one of the bags. She went back to packing as if nothing had happened. When I came back with the water, she quickly said she was finished and tried to leave with the bags. One of them looked oddly heavy, so I stopped her. "Hold on a second," I said, narrowing my eyes. "What's in that box you just slipped in there?" Her face went red, and she stammered that it was just a few of Emily's personal things. But I wasn't buying it. The faint, musty smell of old bills gave it away. I opened the bag and found a shoebox packed with worn $50s and hundreds of dollars. "Jennifer," I said, my voice cold, "are you stealing from me?" She panicked, stumbling over her words, insisting that the money belonged to Emily and she was just doing what she was told. But the guilt was plain as day on her face. "You came here for clothes, not a stash of cash." "That's theft," I stated flatly. "I'm calling the police." Jennifer broke down, pleading with me not to call the cops. She said she had kids, a family, and that this would destroy her life. I didn't feel much sympathy, but I decided to offer her a deal. Fine, I said, guiding her to the couch. But this is your only chance. Leave right now, and from here on out, you'll tell me everything about Emily's life, especially anything that involves her boyfriend, Rick. She nodded, clearly shaken, agreeing to be my informant. Once she was gone, I took the shoebox and tucked it away at Diane's place for safekeeping. Later, I pieced together where that cash might have come from. Emily's aunt had passed away recently, leaving her a cottage. She never mentioned inheriting any money, so I figured she found the cash hidden somewhere on the property. Maybe she'd planned on keeping it as a backup if things with Rick went downhill. The next time Emily called, I picked up, just waiting for her to mention the missing cash. Sure enough, she was practically spitting with anger. Matt, that money belongs to me. Give it back, she demanded, her voice dripping with fury. If that's true, then I'm guessing you kept it off the books, I replied smoothly. Because if you hid cash here, that's income you didn't report on our taxes. Feel free to let the IRS know. She was livid, but I could tell my response caught her off guard, making her realize I'd thought this through. She muttered something I couldn't make out, then hung up, and I knew I'd gotten under her skin. A few days after that heated exchange, I decided it was time for a bit of security. I installed a dashcam in my car and set up a camera near the garage, suspecting her temper might drive her to go after my vehicle next. And sure enough, on Wednesday morning, I checked the footage during my lunch break, and there she was, swinging a hammer at my windshield, smashing it to pieces, and denting the hood. I could almost feel a chill watching her, screaming and flailing with a fury I hadn't seen before, like she'd completely lost it. I didn't waste a second before calling the police. The officers came by, and as soon as they saw the footage, they had all the evidence they needed. They picked Emily up for property destruction, and to my satisfaction, added on resisting arrest when she tried to squirm her way out of it. Watching her get hauled off in cuffs stirred a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness. This was the woman I'd once loved, now reduced to a raging, destructive stranger. The very next day, her divorce lawyer got in touch, letting me know a court hearing had been scheduled for Thursday morning. Emily was now demanding access to our joint accounts, claiming I'd drained everything and left her with nothing. When I arrived at the courthouse, there she sat, wearing a smug grin, clearly feeling she had the upper hand. Her lawyer addressed the judge with a look of righteous indignation. Your Honor, my client has been unfairly denied access to marital assets. We request a fair 50-50 split of the remaining funds. The judge turned to me. Mr. Daniels, do you have a response? I nodded and stepped forward. Yes, Your Honor. My wife has been funneling money from our joint account for months to support herself and her relationship with another man. The funds I withdrew were to cover household expenses while she was abandoning the marriage. Emily shot up, her face red with anger. That's a lie. He took everything, she shouted, but her lawyer quickly motioned for her to sit down, whispering frantically in her ear. I handed over bank statements to the judge, detailing Emily's deposits and spending over the past year. The records clearly showed that she'd been diverting her paycheck into a private account. I'd even included a recorded call with her HR department confirming she'd changed her direct deposit. The judge looked over the evidence, raising an eyebrow at Emily. Her lawyer stumbled to recover. Your Honor, even if my client has personal funds, Mr. Daniels is still obligated to provide her fair access to marital assets. The judge shook his head, unimpressed. Counselor, your client has been supporting herself under false pretenses. Since Mr. Daniels has been managing the household expenses alone, there's no reason to change the current arrangement until the divorce is finalized. He dismissed the case, and I walked out of that courtroom feeling a hard-earned victory. As I headed toward the exit, Emily stormed up behind me, her face twisted in rage. She threw threat after threat at me, her voice echoing down the courthouse hallway. I calmly took out my phone and started jotting down her words, lifting it just enough for her to see. Emily, this is all violating the restraining order, I said coolly. I'll call the police if you don't back off. And by the way, how was jail? Ready to spend a little more time there? She stood there, fists clenched, her face red with fury. But I didn't stick around for her latest outburst. I headed straight for the exit, finally free from her relentless anger, at least for now. That evening, needing a break from all the drama, I wandered into a quiet bar I hadn't been to before, hoping to relax and avoid any familiar faces. But wouldn't you know it, I ran into Zeke, a guy I'd met once before. He was nursing a drink at the far end of the bar, and we got to talking about life and the messes it throws our way. Zeke started griping about his old clunker of a car, mentioning how his ex-wife took the good one when she left him for someone else. "This thing's falling apart," he said, shaking his head. "No AC, and I can barely keep it running." I leaned in, an idea forming in my head. "Well," I said, keeping my tone light, "let's say, hypothetically, you could get a replacement if your car got totaled. But you'd have to follow my advice to the letter." He raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "I'm listening." I laid out a simple plan for Zeke, one that didn't involve anything reckless but would send a message. "Picture this," I said, leaning in. "You're driving down Fifth Avenue, and suddenly a cat darts out. You slam on the brakes, and if the car behind you isn't paying attention, well, they rear-end that old clunker of yours. Then, insurance might just cover the damage." Zeke looked a bit skeptical. "But what about the person behind me? What if they get hurt?" I assured him it wouldn't be just anyone. We'd be making sure it was someone who had it coming. In fact, I had a pretty good feeling it would be Melissa. He thought it over, and then a sly grin crept across his face. "All right, let's do it." We set the plan for Friday afternoon, and just thinking about it brought a strange sense of satisfaction, like some overdue karma was about to hit. When Friday rolled around, I left work early, planning to get home in time to have a chat with my daughter Claire, who'd just returned from college. We sat down, and I told her everything that had happened with her mom. I even played some recordings of the arguments Melissa and I had over the past months. Claire's eyes went wide with shock as she heard the harshness in her mother's words, a side she'd never seen. Afterward, we talked about relationships, where things had gone wrong in my marriage, and why respect was so essential. "You've got to treat each other right from the start," I said, my voice weighted with years of hard-learned lessons. "Otherwise, things can end up like this." Claire nodded, looking thoughtful as she took in my words. I hoped it would be enough to help her avoid the mistakes I'd made. Just as our conversation wound down, my phone rang unexpectedly. "Mr. Daniels, this is Memorial Hospital. Your wife's been in a car accident." Without a second thought, Claire and I drove straight over. When we arrived, I let Claire go in first. She came back out a few minutes later, her expression mixed with anger and sadness, and I could tell her conversation with her mom hadn't gone well. Then I went in to see Melissa myself, finding her laid up in bed with a broken wrist and plenty of bruises. She looked rough, and as soon as she saw me, her face twisted with anger. "Well, Melissa," I said, a hint of bitterness in my voice. "Quite the week, hasn't it? First, you lose your marriage, then your home, get slapped with a restraining order, arrested, and now you're out of a car." She spat back. "Go to hell, Matt." I couldn't help but smirk a little. "Tell me," I asked casually, "has Travis come by to visit yet? Or is he busy with someone else tonight?" I let the words hang there, watching as her face paled. I had a feeling Travis wasn't her only special someone. "Oh, and just so you know," I continued, twisting the knife a bit more, "I took your car off my insurance on Monday. So if you forgot to get your own policy, you'll be on the hook for every cent, the towing fees, repair bills, and everything else. Good luck with that." Her face turned white as the reality set in. With no insurance, this accident was going to cost her more than she could probably afford. And with a felony charge looming, her job prospects were dim. For a second, I saw something like regret in her eyes, a crack in her tough exterior. But I didn't care anymore. She'd made this bed, and now she'd have to lie in it. Just as I was about to leave, I paused at the door. "Remember a few years back, Melissa?" I asked, watching her face. When you were sick, I took a week off, stayed by your side, held your hand, cleaned up after you, made sure you had everything you needed. And as soon as you got better, you went right back to treating me like dirt. I let the words sink in. I wonder if Travis will take care of you like that. As I walked out of that hospital room, a strange sense of closure settled over me. Melissa could stew in her misery all she wanted, but I was done. I'd seen enough. Finally, the road ahead was clear. I thought that would be the end of it, but a week later, Melissa showed she wasn't about to let things go. One evening, as I was heading into the house after work, a hard blow hit me from behind, knocking the breath out of me. Before I could turn around, I felt a rough grip on my arm and heard a low, menacing voice in my ear. "You're gonna give me that money, and you're calling off those charges against Melissa." It didn't take long to figure out who'd sent him. Travis, of course. He twisted my arm, but I managed to reach for my car remote and hit the panic button. The blaring horn and flashing lights startled him, and as neighbors started looking out their windows, he gave me one last punch before bolting. I called the police, but by the time they arrived, Travis was long gone, and no one could identify him. I already knew Travis was trouble, but what I found out next took things to a whole new level. The day after my run-in with him, Claire came to me, visibly shaken, and told me about her own disturbing encounter. Apparently, Melissa had invited her over under the guise of wanting to talk things out. But when Claire got there, Travis was waiting, and the situation turned ugly fast. He cornered her, saying crude, intimidating things while Melissa stood by, looking on with a desperate expression. When Claire tried to leave, he grabbed her wrist, but thankfully, she managed to pull out her pepper spray and fight her way out. Hearing that was my breaking point. I was livid, just like any father would be. But Claire, wise beyond her years, calmed me down, reminding me not to do anything reckless. "Dad, I'm safe," she assured me. "Let's just make sure justice is served." She urged me to take the evidence we had to the authorities and let them handle it. So, I went to the district attorney, handing over everything: Claire's account, the recordings, and evidence of Travis's attack on me. I pushed hard for them to intervene and keep Melissa away from Travis, hoping maybe some jail time would finally break his grip on her. Then, a few days before Melissa's trial, something terrifying happened. I was driving home along a dark, lonely road when I noticed a truck speeding up behind me, tailgating dangerously close. My heart raced as I realized this wasn't just some reckless driver. They were coming for me. I dialed 911, narrating the situation to the operator, keeping my phone recording the whole time. The truck sped up alongside me just as we reached a narrow bridge. In that split second, I caught sight of Melissa in the passenger seat, her face pale and fearful. I slammed on my brakes, causing my car to skid, and narrowly missed the truck as it screeched to a stop in front of me. I managed to veer off the road, my car finally coming to a halt on a gravel slope leading down to a creek. Hiding under the bridge, I clutched my phone and my gun, holding my breath as the sound of approaching sirens filled the air. When I eventually climbed back up, police cars were already there, and the officers had Melissa and Travis in handcuffs. They were both charged with attempted manslaughter, and as I watched them being led away, a strange calm settled over me. It wasn't exactly joy, but more a quiet sense of justice finally served. The next few months were a blur of court hearings, finalizing the divorce, and sorting out the mess Melissa had left behind. In the end, she agreed to give up nearly everything in exchange for leniency, but Travis wasn't so lucky. He received a hefty prison sentence. Melissa did her time and eventually got out on parole, while I focused on rebuilding my life. Years later, after some time and reflection, I decided it was finally time to close this chapter once and for all. I reached out to Melissa, and we met one last time. I handed her an old shoebox filled with memories of the life we'd once shared. We exchanged a few final words, an acknowledgement of the harsh toll life had taken on both of us. As I watched her walk away, I realized that, finally, I no longer held any anger. Our story was over, laid to rest at last. I hoped she'd find her peace someday, and as for me, I was ready to leave the past behind and look forward to whatever life had in store. Thank you, listeners, for your incredible support and for tuning into my stories here on YouTube. Your encouragement and feedback mean everything to me. Stay tuned for more stories, and remember to cherish the moments that matter most.